Okay guys, welcome back. It's time to cover the last module of this class. And as you can see, this module is called Native vSAN File Service. I've mentioned earlier that this is not a new feature in 7.0 Update 1. This was actually introduced in 7.0, but it was enhanced in 7.0 Update 1. And if you take a look, here what we're talking about is, in a nutshell, having a brand new type of object, which is going to be shared with non-cluster members using different protocols, such as NFS and or Samba. As you can see here, it says you can use vSAN file service to create file shares in the vSAN data store. So just like in the past, in 6.5, as a matter of fact, we introduced iSCSI capabilities. Now we have NFS and Samba capabilities. Remember, we're talking about creating shares. These shares realistically are going to be objects. And these objects are going to be controlled by appliances, but not really by the appliance itself. Inside of the appliance, you're going to have containers. Notice it says data stored in the file shares can then be accessed from various supported clients over a TCP/IP network. So what we're talking about is potentially having other machines like Unix machines, Linux machines, or for that matter, even Windows machines. And again, these non-vSAN cluster members are going to be the clients, and they will be able to access your shares. Now here we have the goals of Module 11. And once again, over the next few minutes, I want to talk about this particular feature. I want to talk about how it was introduced in 7.0, how it was enhanced in 7.0 Update 1, and I'm going to do two demos. In those demos, first, I'm going to show you how to configure the appliances. Now, the appliances will take a while to configure. The second part will show you how to create a share. We're going to look at the attributes of the share, and then I'm going to show you how to mount it from another machine. As you can see here, we have a series of goals. And once again, in this case, I am going to show you how to do all this using the vSphere client. So let's take a look at this particular page. If you take a look at this page, once again, on the upper left, they tell you what this is for. And I've already mentioned, we're talking about creating NFS or Samba shares and make them available to non-vSAN cluster members. So again, just like we did iSCSI in 6.5, now we have an alternative to that. Now, when you take a look at the illustration, you can see that the clients could be potentially different types of machines. So notice, for example, in one hand, the client could be some kind of VM using the NFS protocol. Notice it could also be a physical server, or for that matter, again, this could also be used by Kubernetes. So when you take a look, in this page, they also mention the concept of VDFS. And as you can see in the middle of the page, it says vSAN file service is based on the vSAN distributed file system. So we're talking about having, in this case, 4 appliances. That's because we have a 4-node cluster, which are going to be inside, controlled by containers. The containers are actually doing all the work. One of the things to understand is that these appliances will never be migrated. You don't get to choose the number of CPUs or the amount of memory. You don't want to muck around with them. Basically, they are controlled by the EAM service. So let them be. If, for example, you put a host in maintenance mode, that appliance will not migrate using something like vMotion. It will shut down instead. But the actual container inside will be migrated elsewhere. Because remember, every object always has an owner, and this is no different. When you take a look, once again, I will show you how to do this lab. And again, remember, the lab will take about an hour. So when you look at the illustration, here you can see that if you have a 3-node cluster, you're going to have 3 appliances. In my case, I have a 4-node cluster, so I'm going to have 4 appliances. Each appliance, you can see the reference to Docker. Obviously, again, each of these appliances will be in charge of X number of shares. Now, I'm only going to have one share, but you could definitely have more than one. And as mentioned, the idea here is quite simple. The shares are controlled by the actual container. If you have a problem with the container, somebody else will become the new owner. And I'm going to show you how you can tell using the vSphere client. When you look at this particular page, once again, after you deploy the appliances, you get to specify how many shares you want, what is the protocol to use, and in 7.0 Update 1, you could, if you want to, use Kerberos as well. So if you take a look at this page, you don't get to choose which appliance is in charge of which share. This again is controlled automatically. The system is always trying to optimize performance. And again, when it comes to where exactly the share is going to be, remember, this is an object. You get to choose the policy of the object. And push come to shove, you don't know exactly, unless you look, of course, at the vSphere client, where everything resides. You don't choose the individual disk. Now, I've mentioned before that this is controlled by appliances. So these appliances get installed via OVF. And again, that's going to be the first part of my demo. So notice, these appliances are running our version of Linux. I'm talking about Photon Linux. And notice the maximum number of appliances that you can have is 32. So if you have theoretically a 64-node cluster, you're going to have a maximum of 32 appliances. It's always one per host to a maximum of 32. Now, when we look at this page, here you can see the dimension in the left side of the illustration, OVF. Now, these appliances are going to be deployed via OVF. And when you start this up, you want to make sure you remember to take care of the NS. Now, in my demo, I'm going to have 4 of these appliances. I'm going to specify the IPs. I'm going to click on an icon called autofill. So that way I don't have to type all the IPs in a row because, again, they're going to be sequential. But then, instead of typing the names, I am going to, again, just simply tell it to look up DNS. And because we've taken care of DNS, you will see automatically all the names will be mapped to those IPs. When it comes to those OVF packages, you could try to get all the software over the internet, but instead here, we have prepared a folder that you can see from your desktop. That folder has 6 files. Those are the 6 files that you need in order to deploy those appliances. When you look at this particular page, if you take a look at the policy that is being used by these appliances, this particular set of appliances uses a policy called FSVM_profile_do not modify. You don't want to change that particular policy. And again, that policy, notice, says this appliance is not going to be redundant. So in a nutshell, it's going to be what? RAID 0. It's not going to be striped. So number of disk stripes is 1. It's not going to have an IOPS limit. But again, this appliance will not ever migrate elsewhere. When you take a look, the first thing you'll have to do is enable the service. And as you enable the service, what you're going to be doing is you're going to follow a wizard. And you're going to have to specify, for example, who is your DNS server. You're going to have to specify the IP of the gateway. You're also going to have to specify the IPs of the appliances. And once again, you have to take care of DNS ahead of time. So when you take a look, the book will tell you exactly what you need to input. Having said that, at any given time with the vSphere client, you can see what you actually have. Now, one of the things that you need to specify is the name of what they call here the domain. This is your vSAN file service domain name. And notice at the very top of the page, it says a vSAN file service domain is a namespace for a group of file shares with a common networking and security configuration. So you just got to come up with some kind of name. And when it comes to the network, the appliances need to be connected to a particular port group. So just like in this illustration, the appliances will be connected to the port group called VM network. It is imperative that you connect them to the right network. Otherwise, you will not be able to interact with your NFS client. And in this case, the NFS client is going to be your desktop. Here you can see the IPs that we're going to use. So the IPs are going to be 172.20.10, 100, 101, 102, and 103. And those are the names that automatically will be populated because, again, we've taken care of DNS ahead of time. Now, when you take a look, here's what you expect to see. If you are in host and clusters, you expect to see a resource pool. And inside of the resource pool, you will have 4 appliances. Notice carefully here, you're looking not at host and clusters, but you're looking at virtual machines and templates. So here you don't see the actual pool. Here you see a folder. Now again, make sure that you don't change the attributes of the pool. Make sure you don't change the attributes of the VMs. In my demo, I will show you some of those attributes. But again, if you try to change them, the system will complain. And it will warn you that, again, these appliances are not for you to muck around with. Now, when you take a look, the idea here is once we have everything in place, we want to create shares. And as you can see here, you have different choices. I am going to choose file shares. And again, when it comes to file shares, you could choose different versions of NFS. Once again, we support version 3 and version 4.1. But besides that, remember, you could also use Samba. In the lab, we're going to use NFS. So the way that you do it, you select the cluster, you go to configure, you go to file shares, and you click on add. You specify the type of share that you want to have. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come up with a name, specify the protocol, whether you want both NFS version 4.1 and 3 or just one of them. When it comes to 4.1, you could choose different types of security, for example, Kerberos. And when it comes to the policy, I'm going to go with a two-way mirror. Now, the share, I'm going to make it very small. It's going to be about 5 gigs. So you get to choose how big the share is going to be. And you also get to choose a share warning threshold. So for example, I can say, you know what, my clients can use up to 5 gigs, but I want to get a warning once we exceed 4 gigs. So I'm going to go with those values, 4 and 5. And if you take a look, remember, as you create a share, we're talking about the NFS protocol. You get to choose who is going to be a valid client. As you can see in this illustration, you can choose different options. You can say no access. I'm not going to use that. Instead, I'm going to use allow access from any IP. That means anybody potentially could mount the share. You could also be more specific. As you can see here, the third choice allows you to specify whether, again, you want to have just one NFS client or, again, potentially a subnet. So you could be very specific or fairly generic. Now, when you take a look, here you can see that with the vSphere client, you could click on copy path. And what this would allow you to do is it would allow you to, again, make it very easy for you to remember exactly what you have to do from the client side. So all this is going to be shown in the demos. Now, when you take a look, here you can see that we're selecting the actual cluster, but we're changing from configure to monitor. So when I take a look at monitor here, notice I'm going to performance. And in 7.0 and 7.0 update 1, not only, again, you have the choices for example, VM and backend, but we have a new choice, again, called file share. And you can see all sorts of performance related information. You can see here the time range is 1 hour, but again, you can change that as well. And if you take a look, when it comes to Skyline Health, formerly known as the health service, you have a series of new tests related to file service. I'm going to show you again all of those 3 choices. You can see they're called infrastructure health, file server health, and share health. So for example, you can see whether or not your share is healthy or not, whether maybe you have a problem with one of the components, or again, maybe you have a problem with one of the appliances, and so on. And if you take a look, here you have certain things that you may want to remember. Now, let's go through the bullets. Here it says vSAN file service considerations. Number one, only IPv4 is supported and static IPs are required for the appliances/containers. Notice you can have up to 32 file shares. Again, here in class, we're going to do one. And when you take a look, you can see it says each host in a vSAN cluster should have a minimum of 4 CPUs because your appliance in 7.0 Update 1 will have 4 virtual CPUs. Make sure that when you do this lab, that you do it on the first cluster because my memory doesn't fail me. The second cluster has hosts with only 2 logical CPUs. So you need to do this in the first cluster, not the second one. And if you take a look, this is not for stretch clusters or for that matter for 2-node clusters. Again, you need 3 hosts minimum. And again, here in class, we use 4. So when you take a look, in a minute, we're going to take a look at the first part of the demo. So remember, there's going to be 2 demos. When you do the lab, which is lab 15, which is your last lab, remember, this lab will take close to an hour. So the first thing you need to do is you need to enable this feature, configure the appliances, then probably take a 15-minute break. Once the appliances are ready, what you want to do next is you want to create a share, and then you want to test it. Hopefully, again, you enjoy the demos. And again, hopefully, everything is great when it comes to the lab. So I'll see you in my demo. Thanks, guys. Have fun.